Welcome to the Get Real Movies podcast. My name is Daniel Chadwick-Shubat. I am your host, and this is episode 28, where we will be talking to Jack L. High about his book, The Nazi and the Psychiatrist, which Nuremberg, the movie that is releasing later this week, is based upon. Jack was a wonderful guest to chat to about this film. He had some great insights into what was Hollywoodized, what was quite true, and some of the things that he loves seeing on the screen. We also chatted a little bit about his time at the Toronto International Film Festival, which I had the pleasure of attending too. I didn't get to go to the premiere of the film because I saw it at a press screening, but he told me a bit about his time with the cast and the director as well. He talked about the long process behind making this film, and he talked about some of his conversations with Douglas Kelley's son and preparing him for this film that was coming out about his dad and his dad's complicated relationship with one of the architects of the final solution, Herman Göring. It is a really fascinating film and one that I went into sort of blind in terms of I didn't think Russell Crowe could pull off Herman Göring, and man, was I wrong. I was pleasantly surprised by his performance and Rami Malek as well. And I feel like this is a film that will age quite well for me in terms of rewatching it. And I learned a lot, not only in the film, but also in this conversation with Jack. So without much further ado, here's my conversation with Jack L. High. And now I have the unique pleasure to talk to the author of The Nazi and the Psychiatrist, which Nuremberg is based on, and that is Jack L. High. Jack, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me here, Daniel.
Yeah, it's a pleasure having you. I understand that you were at the Toronto International Film Festival where this debuted as well. I had the pleasure to see the film there at one of the press screenings. But before I get into the movie itself and how historically accurate it is, I'd love to hear about your experience there and your experience with the movie in general.
Well, I think it's a wonderful once-in-a-lifetime experience for an author to have, to see his book translated to the screen. And I was at the premiere performance for festival ticket holders, and it was full, and most of the cast was also there. And it was a little bit unearthly, I have to admit, to see some of the scenes playing out on the screen that I had previously only imagined in my mind based on the research that I had done. So it was thrilling, and my family was there with me. And I'm glad to say that I can honestly recommend this movie, Nuremberg, to other people. And I'm glad that I can say that. I never had doubts that it would be a good film, but it's always great to be reassured after watching it. And this was my first chance to watch it. So it was really an experience I expect to have only once in my career, and it was very exciting.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I think I've noticed that with a lot of authors that you just hope that they do the book justice, because sometimes, you have certain films that don't do the book justice. And especially when it comes to such an important event in human history, at least recent human history, you want it to be spot on. You wanted to represent the facts well enough, with obviously a little bit of Hollywoodizing in it, and that's expected. But it's a relief to hear you say that you enjoyed it and can recommend it as well. So I guess my first question for you would be, what was the process like getting this film made from your book? When were you first contacted? Were there other people interested at first? And how did it get into the hands of James Vanderbilt and Russell Crowe and everyone involved?
It began a long time ago, in 2011. And at that time, I had just published an article in Scientific American Mind, a magazine that they were then publishing on psychology and psychological neuroscience type topics. And I test drive my book ideas as articles to see how well I like the story, how well it goes, how readers react, and so on. So that article had just come out. And at that time, James Vanderbilt was with a production company called Mythology. And I had met James already because Mythology had optioned my earlier book, The Lobotomist. And as he's since told me, he read the article and immediately thought that it had great film potential and wanted to work on it. So mythology then optioned the article and then later the book when that came out in 2013. And over the years, James sent me various versions of his screenplay. And I was heartened because in every version of the screenplay, it got better and sharper and more focused. And so that's one difference between my book and the film. My book covers a period of 40 or 45 years in the life of Douglas Kelley, the psychiatrist in the title. The movie covers a period of less than 1 year. And so that 1 year is a big part of the book, but there's much in the book, much before and much after. So as James was working on that mythology kind of broke apart, and James joined forces with another production company called Bluestone. And it was with Bluestone that things got going actually very quickly. This was at the end of 2023 when I found out that Bluestone wanted to option the book because they had a production in mind imminently in 2024. And that was delayed some because of the Screen Actors Guild strike and the Writers Guild strike. But things did eventually get going in the spring of 2024. I flew to Budapest, where all the filming happened in May. Was it May 2024? And spent several days there and saw some scenes being filmed, and got a hint of what things were like and the approach that this filmed story was taking off the page of the screenplay, and was happy with what I saw there. And then it took another year to year and a half for all the funding to come in, studio distribution, etc. It was a long process.
Yeah, that does sound like a long process. I think the next question I guess I'd want to ask is, did you see Russell Crowe as Herman Göring? Because I think the biggest compliment I can give him is I never would have expected him to play Herman Göring. I didn't think he'd be good as Herman Göring, and he blew me away as Herman Göring. So I'd love to hear what you thought about his performance and what if he really encompassed this rather evil man that people maybe sometimes are not as much in the know about because of, the big bad that is Adolf Hitler. And people sort of forget about Göring at times, and Eichmann and a few of the others.
I did not think of Russell Crowe in that role until Jamie told me he was in it. I'm not very good at anticipating how an actor will fill a role. And people had often asked me before then, who do you want to play Göring? Who do you want to play Douglas Kelley? And I really don't have any ideas in that department. I like movies and go see a lot of movies, but I consider the casting agents and the directors the experts in that department. But that said, I'm very happy with how Russell Crowe played that part because he captured the dual qualities of Herman Göring, which are the evil potential that always lurks around him, and the charm that he was so good at displaying. Even in prison, he made people laugh. He made people feel relaxed. He even told jokes about himself and about Hitler in prison. Those aren't in the movie, but he was the kind of person who could easily charm everybody around him. And I think Russell captured that so well.
Yeah, and that's something I never knew about Göring, is that he was such a charming man. And, I think it goes unsaid that a lot of these men did have to be charming because they convinced a lot of people to do a lot of evil things. But you've never really seen that on the screen. At least for me, I've never seen Nazis portrayed as charming people and charming and well-spoken, besides maybe Inglorious Basterds and Christoph Waltz and that. So when you started talking about the movie and it was getting made, what sort of conversations did you have with James and maybe with some of the actors about portraying these characters correctly while also still realizing that they are truly evil men. And I'd love to know what you think about how do you play that line correctly. Maybe you can't really comment on that as an actor, but your thoughts as the author of the book.
My interactions with James, the director and screenwriter, consisted of him sending me drafts of the screenplay and then me commenting on them. And I don't think I commented heavily because I didn't see my role as the gatekeeper of fact or as somebody whose job is to make sure that the movie gets everything right. I see movies as entertainment primarily. And my main concern and interest was that it be an entertaining movie that delivers a powerful message. And fortunately, I can say it does that on both counts. When I went to Budapest in 2024 and was on the set, I did talk with some of the people involved in the production, including one of the actors, about what they were doing, and with the actor about his interpretation of his part. He wanted to, it was not Russell Crowe, he wanted to check with me about how he thought of his character and whether I thought that was reasonable and well thought out, and I did. And so we talked about that some. And I also talked with the cinematographer about how he was approaching shooting the film, and I talked with James also there. And so I'm not the kind of author, I know there are book authors who are different, who want to defend the story I've written to be portrayed on film exactly as I saw it in writing the book. I'm thrilled that James and the other people involved in this production saw the potential for something in my book. And I have a lot of faith in their artistic vision and their experience with movies to turn it into something. And that something that they created, in this case with Nuremberg, may deviate some from all the facts that are in my book, but it doesn't deviate from the overall direction of the book and the message of the book. And also, I have to say, my opinion is that anybody who expects to learn about history 100% factually from movies will be disappointed, because that never happens. So in producing a movie that's entertaining and gives a great message, I'm really happy with Nuremberg, even though, much of my book parts were left out and various aspects were changed for dramatic purposes. I was behind it completely.
And I think another big part of this film is obviously the psychiatrist, and that's Douglas Kelley. And Rami Malek did a great job as well. And I think this movie is rightly getting a lot of its plaudits for the acting performances. It's a really stellar cast. But when you were imagining Douglas Kelley and the way he interacted with Göring, I think some of those scenes, especially between Crowe and Malek, were quite illuminating and quite interesting to watch, because they're very talky as Kelley slowly gains the trust of Göring and you realize what his goal is. What was it like seeing that on the screen, and were there any things that you noticed that were really spot on, or maybe they deterred a little bit from the truth, but you enjoyed it nonetheless? Because I think you made it clear that you're a big fan of the film, and that's wonderful to hear, especially from someone who knows the facts. But yeah, I'd still love to hear about where it might have deterred from the actual history.
I've always thought of this coming together of Herman Göring and Douglas Kelley as a clash of the titans, something like that. In fact, when I discussed the book years ago, when I was writing it with Dr. Kelley's son, who's also named Doug Kelley, and who is an important source for my book, we joked that it was like King Kong versus Godzilla, because these men were both very well endowed in the ego department, thought very highly of themselves, were formidable men, both of them. So as I watched the scenes in the movie where Kelley and Göring, or Rami Malek and Russell Crowe, are clashing and trying to establish dominance. I saw that playing out. I had a conversation with Doug, the son, a few months ago, in which I felt I had to forewarn him about one aspect of the movie, and it's that Doug's mother, Mrs. Kelley, doesn't exist in the movie. In the film, Douglas Kelley is apparently not married. No wife is ever mentioned, and is kind of a lone ranger operating in Nuremberg. So that's one big difference. And then another factual deviation has to do with the many scenes in the second half of the film in the trial. And by the time the testimony of Herman Göring and the cross-examination of Herman Göring by Robert Jackson occurred, Dr. Kelley was gone. He left Nuremberg in January 1946, and most of Göring's courtroom testimony happened after that, and the movie shows him being there. So that's another deviation. I don't think it's important to the movie's message, but somebody who reads the book and then watches the movie would notice those things.
Yeah, and the relationship between Göring and Kelley is quite fascinating because I watched something a couple months ago that I'd watched years ago when it came out, and it was Manhunt Unabomber, all about Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, and the relationship that James Fitzgerald had with him, who was the profiler who sort of led to his capture. And it shows that there is this sort of weird imbalance between, the criminal and the person going after them, where sometimes they're not as far apart as they think they are. And seeing Kelley sort of realize that as the film goes on is quite scary for, us humans, because that question's always asked, like, would we be able to do what the Nazis did? Of course not. We would never do that. But I think Malick does a fantastic job in sort of presenting that and showing that, all humans are capable of evil, and we're not that far apart from those evil men as we think we are. Do you think that it was very similar for Kelley in real life, or was that something that was more sort of presented in the film?
No, that definitely came from real life. Kelley's conclusion after his time in Nuremberg, when he returned to the States, was that these men who were being tried for all these horrendous war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, were not mentally ill in a psychiatric sense. So they were within the realm of normal. And he was very frustrated that psychiatry could not account for their behavior. How could normal people, not that different from all of the rest of us, do things like this? And that's why this isn't covered in the movie, but that's why after his return to the U.S., Dr. Kelley turned to criminology as a possible discipline that could help explain things like that. And when he went to teach at the University of California, Berkeley in the 1950s, he was a professor of criminology, not of psychiatry. For me, one of the most important parts of my book is the message that Kelley came home with, that this type of fascism, authoritarianism, totalitarianism, that these impulses exist everywhere. And that at the time of Dr. Kelley's return to the U.S., he saw them right in front of him in the guise of the Southern segregationists, who at that time were at a really high water mark, and that the kinds of hatreds and prejudices that they were espousing for cynical reasons, mostly, that is to get votes, were so present in the United States, just as he had seen in Nazi Germany. And he was giving a warning to his fellow Americans that things like this could happen here. Not only that, were happening here. And that's a message we must not forget, because it applies today in how we view the current administration, the Trump administration. The book, and I think by extension, the movie, really is a story about what motivates people to become authoritarians and to support authoritarians, and what we can do to try and prevent that, which is to hold people responsible and to recognize Nazism and other forms of fascism when we see it.
And it's that famous old adage, those who don't learn from their history are bound to repeat it. But even at that time, it was barely history, it was current events. But I think maybe people weren't really aware of the full extent of what happened until many years later. And I'm blessed in a way because I grew up in Europe, and my Oma lived under Nazi occupation. So I didn't really have a chance not to learn about it because it was something that directly impacted, my family and my life. But it's always shocking, I think, for some people from Europe coming to North America, where I know people my age who don't even know what the Holocaust is, or have a limited understanding. And I think what you say, the message of the movie and of the book about being about seeing fascism and realizing that it's not just some mythical creature in the corner that comes around once in every 100 or 200 years. It could be, here right now. I think one of the questions I wanted to ask is, what were some of the things that the film did get spot on that were historically really accurate and you love seeing on the screen because it translated well? I think one of the scenes that sticks out that I really wanted to ask you about was with the Pope. I won't go into too many spoilers because it was one of the funnier scenes of the film, but I'd love to know if that happened and what were some of your highlights in terms of how factual or true they were.
The Pope scene, I can't tell you whether that happened or not. All I can tell you is that it's not in my book.
Okay.
But I know that James Vanderbilt did quite a bit of his own research and added that to the content of the book. So it may have happened. I really don't know.
Okay.
One scene that, for a reason that I don't fully understand, really resonated with me and gave me pleasure to see was a scene early in the movie when the German defendants are being transported in an airplane from Luxembourg to Nuremberg. So the movie shows them approaching Nuremberg, flying over the city, seeing it all bombed out. And this was one of those scenes that gave me an eerie feeling when I saw it on the screen, because I had imagined it so closely while I was researching and writing the book. And I like it because everybody is in there. All of the defendants, not just Göring and a small number of others, but all of them are there in that plane, bouncing reactions off of each other. And it's also a scene in which the very fine ensemble of German actors who play the other Nazi defendants get a chance to show themselves and to do some very fine acting. And it also shows Dr. Kelley trying to entertain them, doing coin tricks and things like that, which he was definitely interested in, and he loved performing stage magic, which is captured nicely in the movie too.
And I think one of the things I appreciate about the film is that it introduced all these characters, all these defendants, and sort of told us what they did. Because normally we focus on the main characters of World War II, and that's Hitler, and to an extent Göring and Goebbels and people like that. But you don't hear about the other people. Like, it really was a complete army and a lot of people supporting one idea, one rather evil idea. I definitely learned a lot just seeing the introductions to those characters and learning about what they did and what their role was in the Nazi party. And I definitely learned a lot. In terms of the film, though, were there any things? I know you said that you were very happy with how it turned out, and you're not one of those people who's going to be like, oh, this is not factual, this is not factual. But were there any scenes that you were like, okay, well, that didn't happen? And, I like to kind of comment on that because then people know, okay, well, that we could see this through the lens of art and Hollywoodizing the film and making it more entertaining, and that's okay. But just so we know, it didn't happen either.
There are some scenes in the middle of the movie that show Dr. Kelley interacting with a woman reporter who is there to cover the trial. And she's an invented character. There were many reporters who came to cover the trial, including many women. But Kelley did not interact with them in that way. It's not the reporter is not exactly a romantic interest, but she is somebody who Kelley gets close to and talks to in telling about things going on in the prison in a way that he probably shouldn't. That there are reasons why that's in there, but that's not a part of the historical record. And then also the movie suggests that Dr. Kelley had to leave Nuremberg because of something he did wrong, which was what he revealed to that reporter, and that information got into the newspaper. And that's not the case. Dr. Kelley did not leave Nuremberg under any kind of cloud of suspicion or dishonor or anything else. He was honorably discharged. And so, mainly for the sake of Doug, the son, who will watch this movie soon, I wouldn't want anyone to get the impression that Dr. Kelley did something wrong while he was there. He was put in the prison in really difficult circumstances, not knowing what he was getting into, as the film shows, and did a creditable job, and I think took away from his experience what a smart, forward-thinking, sensitive person would have, which was the dangers of the kinds of thinking that the Nazis represented. So those are a couple of examples of things like that.
Wow. Yeah. And I think that was one of the moments that maybe was creating some sort of conflict for him. And then, the response where he came back and saved the day, and it was typical Hollywood. And I had to assume that it was sort of a little bit different from the truth, but that's quite interesting to know. And I think it's also good for people to know, so that, like you mentioned, Doug, the son, doesn't need to answer that question 1,000 times. One question I wanted to ask actually is a movie that I saw years ago was Judgment at Nuremberg. Was that at all part of your process when you were writing the book, or in your thinking, or was it in the thinking of the filmmakers, James Vanderbilt, specifically because he directed and wrote it? Because that's another film that really, the only other film that I can think of that showed us that rather important historical event with a stacked cast of its time. But was that ever part of thinking for you or for the filmmakers?
Not for me. I can say that with certainty. Many people don't know that there were many Nuremberg trials. I think there were 12 or 13 of them over a period of several years. And Judgment at Nuremberg is about a different trial. It's about what's known as the doctor's trial. And so
yes,
it's about the treatment of people who were in death camps, concentration camps, and used for experimentation and things like that, and horrible things like that. And so it's not if people think that Nuremberg, the movie we're talking about now, is some kind of remake of that or somehow connected with that in the story, it's not so. A completely different story. And that story was entirely fictionalized, Judgment at Nuremberg, and using kind of a skeleton of what actually occurred in the doctor's trial. So I think it's a wonderful movie, though. It's always been one of my favorite movies, but I didn't have it in mind while I was writing the book. And I would be very surprised if James Vanderbilt had it much in mind when he was writing the screenplay.
Well, that's quite fascinating for me, because I had no idea that it was multiple trials over a period of years. I thought it was just one sort of extensive, lengthy trial. So that's quite fascinating. Before I let you go, and I really appreciate your time here today to talk about the film. Sadly, there's no people really left alive from this time, or very few. So it's very hard to sort of get a clear picture of what actually happened and what might have, been Hollywoodized. So thank you again for shining a little bit of light on that, and congratulations. But one question that I always love to ask my guests is, what are some of the movies that you love, whether they've inspired your work in the past, or just films that you love that you'd love to recommend to the audience? Because I love to get a really eclectic taste of movies, and that's why I love asking all my guests that question.
My all-time favorite movie is The Third Man, which comes from this same period that's shown in Nuremberg. So The Third Man, I think, was filmed in 1949. And I love it because everything comes together. It tells a really gripping, intriguing story of the post-war world in Vienna, where the four allied powers are occupying different sectors of the city and the conflict that comes from that. But it also tells the story of crime. It's a thriller. Someone is selling fake penicillin, which is harming and killing patients in Vienna. The acting is really wonderful. It's one of Orson Welles' best acting performances. And the story was written by a novelist named Graham Greene. He didn't write this story as a novel. He wrote it as a screenplay first and then novelized it. And it's just so well put together. The music is fantastic, too. And the cinematography, I believe it did win an Oscar for cinematography. And it's just one of those movies in which everything comes together, and it does deliver a message on the darkness of what was happening as the Cold War was just beginning. And an ominous feeling comes out of it. And also it has one of the greatest final scenes ever, which I won't describe because it's a spoiler, but it's a really wonderful final scene.
Well, great. Now we have a great movie recommendation for the audience. Jack, I really appreciate your time today. Before I let you go, I'd love to let you tell people where they can find you. I know you have a newsletter that you do called Damn History, but if you'd like to tell any people anywhere else they can find you and on social media and things like that.
Well, the best, easiest place to find me is on my website, which is elhai.com, el-hai.com. And at the website, people can sign up for that newsletter you mentioned, Damn History, which is a monthly free newsletter that I send out for readers and writers of popular history, which I define as history which is written not for an academic or scholarly audience, but for just people who love history. And there are other sections there about my other books. And then I'm also active on social media. I'm on X, Blue Sky, Threads, and LinkedIn. So wherever you might be in social media, I'm probably there too.
Perfect. Well, Jack, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate your time and congratulations again on a wonderful book that's turned into a wonderful movie as well.
Thank you, Daniel. And I appreciate the interesting questions you threw out at me too. It was great.
Thanks so much. So thank you so much for listening to my conversation with Jack L. High about Nuremberg. I hope you learned something. I most definitely did. Jack was such an engaging and thoughtful guest, and I really enjoyed chatting to him about this, as I do all historians about many historical periods, but especially World War II. It's one of my fascinations, and I guess I'm, a 50-year-old dad when it comes to my love of World War I and World War II history. Please do go check him out on his website and on social media, Jack L. High, EL-HAI. And listeners, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate every one of you and every one of your listens. I do it because I enjoy it a lot, but I also do it because I hope people get some answers to some questions they might be asking after they watch a film. And when you watch Nuremberg in theaters on Friday and listen to this episode or listen to it before and watch the film, I hope some questions have been answered as well. So thank you so much for listening to today's episode. You can find us on all the apps you listen to podcasts on. If we are not on an app, please let me know. You can let us know on social media, on Instagram, on Facebook, on X, even on LinkedIn, I believe. But I think we're on all the apps. Please leave us a rating if you enjoyed this episode. You can do that with most of the apps as well. And leave us a comment on Spotify, even if it's just to say what you think, or if you have any questions, I'm always happy to forward those to Jack as well. So once again, thank you so much for listening. We'll see you at the movies. Bye, y'all.